Hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name's Connor. I'm a science fiction, politics, and philosophy nerd, a Marine Corps law enforcement veteran. I would argue a real Republican, and I got a special debate treat for you today. It's Destiny. The Lord streamer, debate bro, liberal, sometimes progressive, but realistically he hates progressives and leftists, versus Konstantin, the centrist, conservatarian, I used to be a liberal, but it turns out that Trump has done everything correct, kind of why I left the left liberal. Which is super fudging annoying. But if I knew what was good for me, that's the content that I would make realistically. I should be trying to steal his audience and being like, oh, you know, I used to be a liberal, but then the liberals went crazy and now Trump's correct about everything. I should have just done that. That would have been a super easy grift. But unfortunately, I understand words. I know words mean things that correlate with reality. And then I have a conscience, which prohibits me from lying. So, unfortunate, and frankly, a skill issue in this industry. But that being said, we're going to watch Destiny and Konstantin debate. I'm going to be interrupting intermittently when I feel like it. I'll be taking notes, so hopefully I don't fuck with the flow too bad. Let's go.
Are you the same as you were 10 or 15 years ago? What do you mean by that? The same. You're not unchanged, right?
Are you pretending to be a moron, or are you actually being one?
Your guys' definitions for everything change at all points in time. That's always the issue. That's always the frustrating thing when it comes to fighting.
Who's us guys?
Conservatives.
I'm not a conservative.
I know you say you're not, but are you sure you're not running for a political party right now? Because that was the most politician answer I've ever heard in my life of a conservative view on foreign policy. Over the past 5 years, so you do this thing where you're like, well, I have to choose between two things.
I'm not going to talk if you keep interrupting me. I'm not interested in this. Whatever this is. You are.
I'm literally not. I'm asking you a question. You just refuse to answer. This is the game. How did I do it again? I'm asking you a clear question. You can't give me an answer.
I'm not going to talk to you unless you listen to what I'm saying as well as me listening to what you're saying.
I am listening.
Okay, good.
Can national identity survive open immigration?
I guess I'll kind of take the reins on this. I feel like when I hear people talk about things related to open borders, mass migration, or national identity, there's kind of two questions that always pop up in my mind, and I never hear people actually kind of tack down what they mean when they say these things. So the first thing is, for national identity, I don't know as much about the various identities that exist in the UK, but I know for the United States, to try to find an overlap between identity from a gay guy in San Francisco versus like a farmer in Iowa or something, there's not many commonalities there to speak of when you talk about national identity, especially when I'm thinking of it in the context of what type of immigrant would threaten that whatever unified identity, whatever those two things are. So I'm kind of curious, I guess, when I think about national identity, when I think about it being threatened by people, my first question is, what is the national identity that we're trying to protect for the United States or for the United Kingdom? And then when we talk about like migration or mass migration, what do we mean exactly when we say that?
Well, okay. So there's two questions there. What is national identity and what is immigration? Why don't we start in reverse and talk about immigration? Take Britain as an example, right? So I've lived in this country. I came to Britain it was just about Russia. Prior to that, it was the Soviet Union in 1996. So let's go back to 1991, because that's the data when we have the census. 1991. What has happened in the last 35 years? So in the last 35 years ago, this country had a population of 58 million people. Today, the population is 70 million. Almost all of that is due to mass immigration. So the population of Britain, the immigrant population of Britain, that's first generation, people who've arrived, went from 4 million to 12 million in the space of 35 years, right? It trebled in 35 years. Now, you might say, well, you know, is that a lot? Is that a little? Who knows? That is more people, in the last 35 years, more people came to Britain than came to Britain in the previous 2 millennia. So more people in 35 years than had come in 2,000 years. Now, that seems like quite a lot, right? Now, we'll talk about some more facts about this, and then we can talk about national identity. I'm going to take a little time, if you don't mind, just to lay this out.
Yeah, I guess just kind of poke around as you answer.
Yeah, but hold on. Let me just let's talk about what we mean by immigration, right?
Okay. Well, then also the mass, because I hear a lot of these words will be like, it was a lot of people.
Well, hold on.
I was like, what does that mean? Yeah.
I'm explaining it. So more people in 35.
Okay. So I'm going to say, if Konstantin is a pussy or an idiot, then I'll attack him for being pusillanimous or being an idiot. But there's nothing wrong with what he just said so far. So he said I immigrated to the UK in 1996, and the population was 58 million. It's gone up to 12 million. All 12 million are from immigrants. That's not the domestic population increasing in number, which can be alarming depending on how you care about national identity. I was going to ask, what's the demographic? Because the truth is that if 2/3 of them are Eastern European, then who would really give a fuck? You know what I'm saying? They're still Europeans. So like, if a bunch of Polish people and a bunch of, I've heard this, that it's stereotypical for Polish people and for like Lithuanians and Latvians to move to the United Kingdom, and effectively like Lithuanians, Latvians, and Poles are British Mexicans. They're the people who come in and they do the blue collar work for 30% less than the natives, and they typically do almost as good of a job. So that's interesting. So I'm actually curious, out of the 12 million, who comes from where? And then more people in 35 years than in 2000. That does sound profound. And I do think that it could be profound, but also I'm wondering if there's like a 30% increase in the British population at any point in history. So for instance, we can divide up 12 million into 60 million and find out what the percentage is. And I wonder if the Norman invasion is comparable in like demographic shift. So for instance, like for those of you who don't know, there's like 2 or 3 invasions in the United Kingdom that made the United Kingdom the United Kingdom. There were like the Celts, who were indigenous to the place. Then there was the Anglo-Saxon invasion, which I think is a Germanic tribe that came over. And those are typically the Britons. Those are like the people that we think of as the true stock of England. But they were Germanic conquerors at some point. So I don't even know how the Celts versus the Germans really, line up. And then also the Normans, which are French people, invaded. And then also there were the Danes, who were the Scandinavians. And so if you see like a blue-haired, blue-eyed, blonde-haired woman or man in the UK, they're typically of some level of like Danish or Scandinavian stock. And then the Anglos and the Celts all mixed together. And then the Welsh and the Scots and the Irish are all mixing together. But they do have ethno-linguistic groups that are kind of separate. There's really like 4 to 30 ethnic groups within the United Kingdom, depending on how you define it.
Years than 2,000 years, that sounds like quite a lot of people. Is
not
that fair?
Necessarily, no.
Is that fair?
No, not really, right? In the context,
really.
like if I were to ask for like the total growth of wealth compared to like the last like 50 years, might also dwarf the last 2,000 years, or the total amount of carbon pollution, or the total amount of TV episodes or plays written or songs written. Like I don't know if I would just arbitrarily say, I'm going to look at immigration, and I'm going to measure it past some 1,000-year thing or whatever.
You don't think that more people coming into a country in 35 years than had come in the previous 2,000 years is quite a lot?
I just think that statement is like vacuous and meaningless. When we say quite a lot,
it's not
like,
meaningless.
Should it have been less?
Sorry, I'm interrupting already, but this is one of the things that actually pisses me off about Destiny's current debate tactics. He did do this during the Alex Preddy shooting and the Renee Good shooting debate. He was like, "There's no reason," and it's like, nah, brah. Like, you could say it's a shitty reason, but we can come up. But you need to be able to articulate your opponent's reason, or else that's kind of R-slurred.
Kind of immigrants shouldn't have come. No. What does that mean?
You're making it into a moral conversation. I'm talking about purely numbers. You might think it's a great thing, right? Like,
well, to be clear, I'm not talking. Just to be clear, I'm not talking moral.
You keep interrupting.
You said a lot, yeah.
You keep interrupting. So,
okay.
If we're talking about quite a lot, you keep trying to make it a moral thing.
I'm not making it a moral thing.
Yes, you are.
If we're going to have a conversation, you're going to have to let me finish a sentence at least.
Well, just don't misquote my position.
Okay,
yeah.
So just calm down for a bit.
I'm super calm.
I know you've got your Red Bull. Just have some water.
I have my Red Bull.
Chill
I'm
out.
still super calm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very simple question. Yeah.
If more people, if you're making a moral issue, it becomes very clouded and complicated. Let's just talk about what we're talking about in terms of pure numbers, right? If more people have come into a country in 35 years than have come in 2,000 years, that is objectively a lot. Now, you might think it's a good thing. Like, I like ice cream, and if I eat a tub of ice cream, I'm not going to say that's not a lot of ice cream. I still like it, but it's a lot of ice cream, right? We'd accept that. It's more, a scoop is not a lot of ice cream, a tub is a lot of ice cream. So more people coming into a country in 35 years than had come in 2,000 years is objectively a lot of people, okay?
Just to be clear, when you say a lot, that's a normative value that's with respect to some kind of norm or when you say a lot.
Oh yeah, compared to before.
Yeah, that's objectively, that is objectively true. It's just kind of a meaningless statement. Like everything is a lot more than the past
what I'm saying is objectively true. I'm grateful.
Correct, yes. That's a meaningless statement, but yes.
Now that we've got there, what does it mean? Well, first of all, think about it like this. And again, it's not about whether you like it or not, whether you think it's a good thing or not, or a bad thing. The three biggest cities in this country in the last 30 years have ceased to be majority inhabited by the people who are native to this land. That's just a fact. And I am one of the people who's come here.
All right. So just Googling this in order to take a look at it. Key periods of population increases. Late 16th, 17th century, a significant rise occurred between 1540 and 1650, approximately a 50% increase. I think this was during early industrialization. 18th century pre-industrial growth. Despite stagnation early in the century, the population began to rise again significantly after 1750. The Industrial Revolution, basically from 1750 to 1900, tripled the human population. That's impressive. 20th century to present, the population continues to rise, more than doubling since 1871 to 70 million by 2024. But 20% of that, 20% of the total growth in the past 35 years is related to immigration. And then I would want to take a look at like Norman invasions and shit. But suffice it to say that a 20% increase in population is not unprecedented. So I think it's more the fact that it's not native stock.
Yeah, in that time. So I'm not saying it's only a terrible thing, but it's an objective fact. The three biggest cities in the country are now majority minority. London, and this has happened very quickly. London was 80% white British in 1991. It is probably around 30% white British today. So if you have seen that level of change in the city in which you live, think about this as well. 3/4 of the people who live in this country today are over the age of 35. So all of this has happened within the lifetime of one generation, effectively. That is a level of change that is A, completely unprecedented, B, extremely transformative, whether you like it or not, good or bad, whatever you may think. You might think, oh, you know, the amount of different kinds of food has got better. It's true, objectively. But it's also true, objectively, that entire swathes of this city are no longer inhabited by the people who used to live here. Again, this is an objective fact. You can like it, you can dislike it, but that is something that has happened. This is true of London, it's true of Manchester, it's true of Birmingham, and it's true of several other smaller cities in this country. By 2060, according to current projections, white British people will become a minority in this country. 2060 is the next 35 years. Right? And that's the entire kind of demographic transformation. These are facts. Forget about people's opinions, my opinion, your opinion. In terms of illegal immigration, there are now almost 1 million, we don't know exactly because it's hard to measure, but we have almost 1 million illegal immigrants in Britain today, which for a population of 70 million is quite a lot. We currently spend £14 million a day I'm not talking about the cost to the taxpayer of having 1 million illegal immigrants here. I'm talking about how much we spend to accommodate them and all other things. Now, 14 million, is that a lot per day? It's quite a lot. But also this is happening at an unprecedented rate. More people come to Britain illegally today than came legally when I came here in 1996. I'll say that again. More people come here illegally every year than came here in 1996 when I came here. That's the level of change when it comes to illegal immigration, and the cost of it, £14 million a day, is increased by a factor of 10 in the last 10 years alone. So it's 1,000% more than what it was. Those are the facts about immigration. So when we talk about immigration and whether it's compatible with national identity, it depends what we mean. If we're talking about, 20, 30, 40,000 people a year, highly selective from compatible cultures as it used to be, perfectly compatible, and in fact, I think probably quite desirable. If we're talking about what we've seen over the last 30 years, I don't think it's compatible with any sort of national identity at all. Now, I've been talking for a long time, so we can get to national identity after you've addressed that.
Sure. So I guess the thing that is a little bit strange to me about the immigration question is that sometimes I'll hear a bunch of descriptions laid out, and I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do with them. There's oftentimes a lack of a prescriptive statement. It seems like there's a little bit of fear of committing to any particular idea about what an ideal immigrant would look like. And then it feels like we're sometimes also lumping a ton of immigrants together. So for instance, when we say there have been so many more immigrants that have come here in the past 30, 35 years, but then we also mention like illegal immigrants or asylum seekers, these are all different groups of people. So I don't know why.
I separated them out. I talked about legal immigration and illegal immigration, right?
I understand, but so the prompt has to do with basically can a country's culture, whatever, survive mass migration? Illegal immigrants are not mass migrating here. The mass migration.
They are. So I just told you more illegal immigrants come here every year now than legal immigrants came here 30 years ago.
I understand that, but if you look at
they are mass migrating.
So then are the legal ones mass migrating, or what? Is it just
the legal immigrants are also mass migrating? It's possible for them both to be mass migrating.
But it's like 10 to 1, right? So
yes.
So comparing the two it seems like we're talking about different kinds of we're probably talking about different kinds of immigrants. We talk about legal versus illegal.
We're talking about both, yeah.
Well, no.
I'm talking about both.
You don't see any difference between a legal immigrant versus an illegal immigrant?
Well, of course I do.
Okay.
But they are both mass migrating here. They're both coming here in unprecedented numbers.
Everything definitionally is unprecedented as you move forward in years. We have an unprecedented amount of technology, an unprecedented amount of energy generation, an unprecedented amount of
I think you might be confused about the meaning of the word unprecedented.
Unprecedented as in it hasn't happened at that level before. Yeah.
Right. So if we have immigration of 20,000 people a year, that wouldn't be unprecedented because we had that before.
Yeah, but the population is growing of the country, the population of the rest of the planet is growing, the economy is growing, there's a whole bunch of other factors at play. It's not like all else equal, there's just 10 million people that have shown up. Like there's other factors at play at all points in time as well. So yes, it's a bit reductive to say like, well, we have an unprecedented wave of whatever. There's unprecedented things happening definitionally every year forward into the future we go.
No, that's not true.
What's the thing that's been frozen in time?
I just explained it to you.
Yes, you laid out a bunch of numbers, and I just explained why they're contextless and meaningless. But now I'm asking, what is the thing that's unprecedented?
Look,
or I'm sorry, what would be a thing that is not changing in the past 30 years? Like if you had to look at something.
One of the most amazing things of arguing with anybody from your position is the extent to which they refuse to understand what words mean. I just explained to you repeatedly what unprecedented means. It means that it hasn't happened before. There have been times in the history of this country when its immigration was in the tens of thousands, and for us to go back to that would not be going forward to something unprecedented. It would be returning to something that we used to do.
Sure.
Right?
My question
is, so what has happened in the last 30 years
I understand what's happened. You've explained it several
unprecedented.
Times. Is there anything in U.S. culture, in British culture, that has remained the same for the past 30, 40, 50, 60 years, for the past 100 years, that doesn't have an unprecedented thing happening constantly?
Absolutely. I mean, that is what a culture is. It was what is preserved over time.
This is a European versus American mindset that I think Stephen might actually just like straight up not understand. And that's fine. I don't know, but like this is where I wouldn't be arguing strongly from a position of ignorance. So let me summarize some things real quick that we've actually gotten, because there is meat on these bones. We might not be able to get anywhere productive, but there is meat on this bone. So we've experienced approximately a 20% increase in population. In 2060, white British people will become a minority or a plurality within their own country based off of current demographic trends. Immigrants do cost a lot more money than they used to. The question is whether or not they emanate from compatible cultures. 35 years is the timeline through which this demographic change has done. National identity, and here's the question, is are we going for a civic nationalist model or an ethno-nationalist model? Now, as an American, I'm sympathetic and prescribe the civic nationalist model, which is effectively the full... I'm on Counterpoints politics today, so I'm going to be a little bit more edgy than usual. So I'm going to say some racial slurs, and you're going to have to forgive me. Okay? There's a movie called Full Metal Jacket, in which a war-skeptical but also bloodthirsty young combat cameraman goes into conflict, and he sees like the mass graves of people who have been slaughtered by communists. And there's a general who dresses him down because he's wearing a peace pin on his lapel, and he's got "Born to Kill" written on his helmet. And the general unironically says, inside every gook is an American. Now, of course, we abhor the use of the word gook, but there's actually like a civic nationalist bent to the statement, which is that Americanism is not about ethnos. It's not about language. It's about a subscription to a propositional nation where we all subscribe to a constitution, and as a result, we all become co-nationalists. This is almost an alien concept compared to the concept of ethnos or nationality in the late 19th, early 20th century. Okay? In the late 18th or late 19th and 20th century, the concept of nationalism is that we share a similar language, we share a similar culture, we share a similar history, and therefore we are stuck together through this ethno-religious linguistic tribalism, and it doesn't matter. You can't really change that tribalism. And so you're supposed to be loyal to your tribe. You're supposed to forward the desires of your tribe. And if it comes at the expense of rival tribes, it is what it is. And so that's where the Brits, it's particularly ironic, Konstantin Kissin being skeptical of immigration to the United Kingdom, he kind of needs to take a stance on what his idea of nationalism is. Is it civic? Is it propositional? Are second and third generation Indian and Pakistani Brits, are they true Brits? Or does their ethnos, does their ethno-religious, cultural, historical, genetic background make them a separate and competing tribe? And weirdly enough, that's at the core of the anxiety of mass immigration. Because if everybody comes in and they all subscribe to the proposition, you don't have a problem. Whereas if everybody comes in and you just have welcomed in effectively a series of competing but separate rival tribes who are all competing for like economic benefit and social clout and power with which to, beat down the other competing ethnicities, then that's obviously going to be a huge fucking problem. And I think that's the anxiety. The reason why I think Stephen is getting pissed off and a lot of liberals get pissed off is because oftentimes with centrists, myself included, by the way, they won't just say, yeah, I have this anxiety about rival ethno-linguistic groups coming into my country, not actually caring about the propositions of my nation, then using the levers of power and economic benefits of my country in order to beat down other ethno-religious groups. And that's obviously a huge concern with Islam, because a lot of people who are Muslim don't see a contradiction in the marriage between religious power and the state. And yet that is contradictory to the United States. So, yeah. Then one of the other things that's interesting, we were Googling demography for the 11 million immigrants and the immigrant pools. And apparently, out of the immigrant pool, 700,000 of them are Poles. And they're one of the largest pools of people. 400,000 of them are Indian. And that's obviously like a British colony with a huge amount of, a huge history with the United Kingdom. 400,000 of them are Irish, which is also like a huge part of it. So yeah, like it seems like the top three aren't even Muslim, but it does seem that the population of the United States, ethnically listed by nation of origin, are 10%, roughly 10% are Indian, roughly 10% are Polish, roughly 10% are Pakistani, and 5% are Romanian, or excuse me, are Roma. They're gypsies. So my question right there is basically what is the ideal immigrant? And that's what Destiny asked, but it didn't seem that Konstantin was willing to answer. And he said, oh yeah, right-wingers always get jumpy whenever you ask this question. I wouldn't get jumpy about this at all. I would say the ideal immigrant wakes up, they work their ass off, they pay their bills, they pay their taxes, they take care of their family, they take care of their community, and they don't commit crimes. That's the ideal immigrant. And then ideally, they also integrate into the broader culture.
How?
A culture is what people do without having been told to do so by a law.
But what is an example of a culture that is unchanging?
How much have you traveled around the world?
Probably more than you.
Probably not, actually.
Okay. So then you should be able to very easily answer. Well, here's an example of a culture that exists.
Well, every time I try and answer your question, you keep talking over
Well, it's
me.
because when you answer, you ramble and say irrelevant things. So my question is,
how can I ramble in half a sentence?
You've been saying plenty of sentences. Do you think the speaking time up to this point is even, or do you think you've spoken more than me?
I have spoken more than you, but I haven't interrupted you.
So then you've had an opportunity to speak. You're just not answering my question. So my question is very simple. What's a culture that you feel has been unchanged for the past 50 years? Or what is an example of cultural preservation? I feel like cultures are evolving all the time. It's definitionally a part of culture.
Of course. Cultures are evolving all the time, but if you were to be plonked in 1970s Afghanistan and 1990s Afghanistan and 2010s Afghanistan and 1950s Britain, 1970s Britain and 2010s Britain, there would be common themes that run through both of those places so that you would instantly recognize, I am in Afghanistan, I am in Britain. Would you accept that?
I agree that different cultures are different, yes.
Right, well done. Good. So we've got there then.
Well, you just established that there are. This is like saying
different cultures are different, which means that they have something about them.
Yes, and
that makes them different.
If you have a brother, both of you will be different for your entire lives. But
there would be a family culture that you have that's different to other families.
But you wouldn't be the same as you were when you were 10 years old.
No,
you
would
grow and change, right?
Of course.
So when you talk,
girls, please. You've both been around the world a lot.
about
but you're still the same
culture,
person, right?
What?
You're still the same person.
Yeah, but you're dramatically changed.
But you're still the same.
No. Are you the same as you were 10 or 15 years ago? What do you mean by that? The same. You're not unchanged.
No, okay. That Destiny needs to take a Xanax before the debate as well. Yes, I am a different person compared to 10 years ago, but there's a thrust of me that's still continuous. I'm still an asshole. I'm still rude. I'm still a Marine veteran. I'm now law enforcement veteran. I speak 2 languages. I arguably speak half a language. Yeah, like I'm not the same person, but there's a continuous through line of who I am. You know? No, in culture is the continuous through line of what you are. Okay? And this is the bullshit. I see bullshit in chat, by the way. The bullshit in chat is pretending that Europeans don't have continuous cultural tropes. It's bullshit. Christianity is obviously a continuous cultural trope that stretches through the medieval period. Rule of law and republicanism is clearly an idea that stretches all the way back to ancient Rome. Like science and academia, these are cultural tropes that stretch all the way back to ancient Egypt. There's like philosophical, religious, identitarian and ethno-linguistic tropes that span centuries or millennia. Okay? So just because we're American and we're a new thing, and in history we were born yesterday, historically, comparatively, doesn't mean that every other place on the planet is like that. Okay? So for instance, like China, Imperial China was very similar for like 2,000 years. Arguably, from like 500 years before Christ to the Mongolian invasions in 1500, you would have a continuous imperial technocratic culture. So pretending that like that is somehow inconceivable is fucking horseshit. And it's historically illiterate, and it's rooted in American youth, historical youth.
Right?
Are you pretending to be a moron, or are you actually being one?
So your claim was that we need to preserve culture because cultures aren't supposed to change.
No, that's not my claim.
Okay, then help me understand. So
I will.
Because if you don't remember, this whole topic started with, I'm curious, what is a thing that is precedented? What's the thing that happens continuously through all of history that isn't changing? And then you pointed to the fact that Afghanistan and the United Kingdom have different cultures. Like, that's something that I would reject.
No, I didn't. I was just explaining to you what cultures are, which are the cultural differences between groups of people that remain fairly constant over time, despite changing somewhat, as all cultures do.
Your definition of culture is the difference between your culture and another culture?
No, I gave you my definition.
You just said. You said it was the differences between cultures that change over time that define one culture against another one.
Okay, let's reset.
Hey, Rectangler. I've taken Chinese history. I've studied history. Tell me you know nothing of Chinese history by directly telling me you know nothing about Chinese history. Yeah, tell me what changed substantially from the time of Confucius to the invasion of the Mongols. Go ahead. Go ahead. And if you say like black powder technology or porcelain manufacturing, I'm going to tell you to fucking go get a vasectomy because you're too retarded for this conversation. Okay?
And you talk for a bit, and then I talk for a bit, and then you talk for a bit.
Well, no, because I noticed that this is how it feels like a lot of these types of people, the centrists, the reformers, the MAGA, whatever, is you paint with such broad brushstrokes that by the end of a sentence, I feel like you haven't really said much at all. And I'm just kind of curious why, when you guys speak about things like the preservation of culture, I don't really hear you allude to anything concrete. Or when you talk about wanting to preserve something, you talk about how something has changed. I don't necessarily hear, like, what are the things that are changing that you don't like. You'll point to things like crimes, but I mean, like, crimes are illegal. Obviously, they shouldn't be happening.
Dragons.
I just don't really hear anything concrete ever, and it's
you.
very unsatisfying to listen to a bunch of people kind of ramble on and on and on without ever having a clear point about what they're talking about. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, for British or American culture, what are these things that you feel are common, maybe you go back 30, 40, 50 years, that were common across the whole country that you feel are changing in a way that they never changed in the past?
Muslims. Let's be real. All right, I'm gonna say what Konstantin Kusin is too big of a pussy to say. Muslims. Okay? So if you look at, obviously, like, Pakistan is a Muslim majority nation, but when Pakistan was still a part of India, because Pakistan only formed in the past century, India was a vassal state of the British Empire, and therefore, like, Indians and what are now Pakistanis were immigrating to the United States, or not the United Kingdom, excuse me, but they weren't immigrating in the waves that they were because we didn't have the massive amount of easy aerial and naval travel. I guess that's the easiest way to say it. So Pakistani and Indian immigration to the United Kingdom picked up, obviously, in the middle 20th century. As a matter of fact, there's a huge history of the punk scene and the skinhead scene in the United Kingdom, which was born of working class resentment to Pakistani and Indian immigrants who took working class jobs in the docks area of England. So there was like a huge, like, they called it packy bashing. The punk kids whose dads had been fired from their cushy jobs at the, not cushy, but still, like, union jobs at the docks, for a Pakistani who would take a third of the pay in order to make money, they would go packy bashing. They would smoke weed, they would get drunk, they would go to a Jamaican bar, weirdly enough, because they weren't racist against Jamaicans, because there weren't enough Jamaicans to be racist against. They would get wasted. Then they would go out on town and they would start fights with Pakistanis because Pakistanis had displaced the white working class. So obviously the through line here is, I don't know, like, British white working class resentment. So, I mean, at least that's a cultural through line for the past 50 or 70 years, is working class British resentment against recent immigrants displacing them within the labor force. So, well, I don't know. I feel like we could have a better conversation if Konstantin Kusin was just, like, honest and he said it's Muslims. Who cares what Muslims believe? I care what Muslims believe. Why don't you care what Muslims believe? If a Muslim believes in God, the last day, and doing good works, and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger, then good. That Muslim can be my neighbor. And he can subscribe to the propositional nation of which I'm a part. If a Muslim believes that Islam is supreme, that secular governments are all satanic, that liberalism and freedom are effectively satanic constructions in order to tempt people from the path of God and put them on the path of damnation. And not only should the state be married to the church, or in this case, religion, but if a satanic society is sufficiently degenerate, then it's actually moral to slaughter your neighbors. Why wouldn't I care about that? And if you don't care about that, you're fucking crazy.
Done?
Are you going to answer that question? He's not going to answer the question. Go ahead.
I've attempted to answer your question many times, and I'll do so again. However, first of all, am I going to be okay to speak now for a bit? Is that going to happen?
Sure. Can you repeat my question first so I know what you're...
Your question is about what is culture. You brought up crime.
That wasn't my question. My question is, over the past 30 or 40 years, what are things that have changed in American or British culture that you feel over the past 200 years before that were unchanging?
Okay.
Muslims.
Okay. One of the things that has changed in Britain over the last 30 years is we now have an extensive number of Islamist terrorist attacks, mass stabbings, mass rape of British girls by Islamist and Muslim grooming gangs. This is not something that happened in this culture before.
Muslims.
Okay, so sexual assault and rape did happen before in
Did you hear the words I said, or did you?
So you said grooming gangs. I know there's the example from the 80s and 90s of the Rotherham.
They're not from the 80s
and
90s. They're happening right now.
What is another grooming gang example? Because I know there are rapes and stuff that happen, but I don't think there are.
Yeah, well, let me explain it to you. So grooming gangs, this is a euphemism that we use to pretend that they're not what they are mass rape gangs where young British girls, usually underage, but also often sometimes young women, would be plied with drugs, plied with alcohol, would be taken from the care homes where they were, predominantly by Pakistani, sometimes other Indian subcontinent Muslims. They would be targeted primarily because they were white and British, so these were racially aggravated hate crimes. And they would be mass raped over periods of years sometimes. That did not used to happen in Britain.
So
that is a cultural change. Can I finish what I'm saying, please?
Okay, you're not going to answer my question. Okay.
I am answering your question.
Well, my question was, what are examples? I don't think this has happened outside of the Rotherham grooming gang, that whole scandal. There have been rapes, there have been gang rapes, but the idea of like a coordinated grooming gang type mass Pakistani targeting British girls rapes, that type of thing is not a thing that I'm aware has been seen in Britain outside of the large Rotherham scandal.
Well, I don't know. I think the fact that somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million British girls might have been raped by these gangs is quite a big deal, and it represents a change in the culture of this country that I think is quite unwelcome.
I never said it wasn't a big deal. I think rape is bad. I just think it's bad when white people do it too. I think it's bad when everybody does it. My understanding.
Yeah, I hate this shit. Yeah, obviously rape is bad, but this is actually something that does piss me off about liberals.
Is right now
liberals. And by the way, weren't all you twats talking about like banning ICE like a month ago? And now you just totally forgot that ICE existed because the political zeitgeist has the memory of a goldfish. Anyways, the BLM kidnapping. Okay. So during 2017, there was a racially motivated torture incident where these 4 people found an autistic boy. They dragged him into a bathroom. They scalped him. They literally took like a pocket knife and cut off parts of his scalp. They kicked him. They punched him. They said, "Fuck Donald Trump, ninja." They beat his fucking ass. And they tortured him for like a day before he was released. Now, this incident was, I think they all caught like a minimal amount. They were all like teenagers, or a majority of them were teenagers. So they caught minimal time. They caught like 3 to 5 years, whatever. I would have thrown the book at these people. They would not have gotten out of jail or prison for like 20 years. So the point of this though is that if we had a similar incident, let's think for a second. If this had happened with the race reversed, let's say 4 or 5 white people had kidnapped a black kid, an autistic black kid, tortured them for 24 to 48 hours, scalped them, and hurled racial insults at them. I'm pretty sure we would still be talking about this shit, right? Like it would be the same thing as like Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, what's the other guy? Mike Brown. All of like the great movement, all of the great martyrs of the BLM movement. This, that would have been one of them. And it probably actually would have shocked the consciousness of Americans to be like, holy shit, there are still some KKK ass racist pieces of shit who are unrepentant in their racism and evil and deserve to effectively to be incarcerated or killed by the state. But because the demographics were flipped between dominant culture and minority culture, it was just like, It's like, you know, it's kind of crazy, but, you know, black people are systemically oppressed and they don't, you know, always control what they do, and they're teenagers and they're young and they're dumb and they just made excuses for it. And then it disappeared from the cultural zeitgeist almost as quickly as it appeared. And so to just have, because this was a racially motivated torture hate crime, okay, the same way is the Pakistani rape gang. It's racially and religiously supremacist and motivated. Now, you can say that, like, oh, these are bad Muslims, because clearly kidnapping women, plying them with drugs and alcohol, turning them into sex slaves, racially abusing them, sexually abusing them, etc., that's clearly not part of the good do works part of the Quran. But then, if you actually do talk to the Pakistani grooming gangs, it's a ethno-religious supremacist motivation. They wouldn't be doing that to Pakistani girls. They wouldn't be doing that to Muslim girls. They're using selected parts of the Quran in order to say, we are at war with the broader society, and these women are the equivalent of our sex slaves gained in warfare. So just kind of shrugging off, I mean, he says 500,000 to 1.5 million people were sex trafficked through this, like, cultural development. But just kind of shrugging off and being like, yeah, we've always had rape. Fuck you a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can clearly say rape is bad in general. We can clearly say when white people rape, bad. We can clearly say, here's all the dating violence, that's bad. And we can also say that ethno-religious supremacist grooming gangs are also fucking vile and evil and need to be dismantled, and the people who participate in them need to receive extreme incarcerated sentences.
For the crime stats in the United Kingdom, it tends to be more white people are even overrepresented in terms of sexual assault and rape, but
Connor, the majority of these victims of grooming, and then say how it's targeting through ethnic supremacy, they're girls who are stuck in the foster system. They're predominantly white girls from the foster system.
I'm aware that there are immigrants that rape people as well. I think all rape is bad, but the idea that there is a mass Islamist, jihadist, rape gang-centered thing in the United Kingdom that's functioning,
so
I think
how many girls would have to be raped for you to admit that it's a mass thing?
The question isn't if it's a mass thing.
Well, as we all remember from my debate with Lauren Southern in Tale of Twin Rabbits, mass means big.
The question is if it's organized. You have a huge problem with definitions. I'm sorry, let me try to keep this tech. You're not understanding. You're not following the conversation.
Stephen,
rape is bad, but organized grooming gang rape.
You've asked me a lot of questions, and every time I answer them, you ignore my answer. Now answer my question.
Yeah.
Answer my question. If 500,000 girls have been mass raped in this way, specifically being targeted because they were not of a particular religion or ethnicity, how many of them would have to be treated in this way for you to admit that it's a mass thing? What's the number that makes a mass? Answer my question.
The question wasn't. I don't know how you would identify
Give
a
us
mass
a number.
thing.
Give us a number.
The question was organized
Give us a number.
grooming.
You said
500,001. So you're right. You're right beneath the threshold. Maybe tomorrow you'll have it.
It's actually.
So the question is there organized?
Between half a million and a million.
Okay. I'll ramble for a second, and then you can ramble afterwards.
So you agree that it's mass?
My issue is because you do this thing over and over again where you won't accurately identify a problem. You'll invent these things because rape isn't bad enough. Now it has to be like a mass grooming gang rape thing. And then what happens is you conservatives, you play this game where you falsely identify a problem, you lie to the audience about it, and then you manage to gain power. You go through with some wacky scheme. Go figure.
Pax says, I don't think Destiny is doing what you're saying he's doing. He's disputing the organized aspect to counter KK's stance on immigrants. Well, right. So that requires nuance, Pax, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So pretending that the Pakistani ethno-religious enclaves en masse were participating in this is incorrect. It was the alienated male criminal element that wasn't integrating into either UK culture or into their own Pakistani immigrant culture. Like oftentimes, at least from the reports that I read about these people, they weren't just socially rejected from broader British culture, they were also socially rejected from their conservative, from their Muslim conservative religious groups. And so that's kind of like the nuance of the situation is, yes, there's an ethno-religious supremacist slant to the justification for why you can treat human beings this poorly. But then ironically enough, these men, because they were criminals, because they used drugs and alcohol, because they were sexually enslaving and treating people poorly, they were also rejected from their own Pakistani ethno-religious enclaves.
Here, the wacky scheme doesn't fix anything, and then somehow you come back with the same recycled narratives over and over again, asking for another shot at it. It's happening right now with Farage and reform. It happened with Brexit. Brexit didn't reduce immigration. It didn't help you with your economy. It didn't do anything really good for the United Kingdom at all. And then it's happening now with reform coming in and making all of these promises to the British people that you're going to be able to cut all of the revenues coming in. You're going to be able to increase all of your funding. You're going to have a no-wait NHS. And it's all built on the same lies over and over again that didn't help you affect any positive outcomes in the past, and it's not going to help you affect any positive outcomes in the future. You can sit here and you can be upset about it, but I watched you and Matt Goodwin debate on stage where you guys both made the bold prediction that once the Tories were out, your immigration numbers would be over 1 million per year. They plummeted to 300,000. I haven't heard you say anything about that. Your predictions were completely wrong, just as they were with Brexit as well.
Well, that was a wonderful presentation. The problem for you is I voted Remain in the referendum.
Because you hadn't been bullied by the Cambridge students yet. I'm aware of the history, but I know.
So, you've come here with a bunch of talking points. That's great.
Hold on. We can break down
Stephen,
anything you want.
Stop interrupting.
Don't accuse me of having talking points.
Stop
Deal with my
interrupting.
arguments.
Stop interrupting.
Then address what I said.
Stop interrupting.
Address what I've said.
Stop interrupting.
Address what I've said.
Stop interrupting.
I believe in you.
Stop interrupting. I let you talk, and I let you make your points. Have some respect for me and for my opportunity to express myself as well. That is how a debate is conducted, so stop interrupting. We started this with a conversation about mass immigration, and I gave you the facts on it, and I defined what immigration is, right? Mass immigration. Now, you're talking about culture. I also explained to you what culture is, and I explained it to you by explaining that it's a continuity of certain things which may also evolve over time. Now, in terms of your point about mass immigration since Brexit, I was not a supporter of Brexit. I didn't think it was necessarily a good idea. And I agree with you that it hasn't reduced immigration. But I don't see how that's relevant to this conversation. We have had mass immigration happen in this country continually over a long period of time, which has changed the country in the way that I gave you. And I gave you a number of examples, like Islamist terrorism, like grooming gangs, and other things, which I don't think you're able to address because they counteract the argument that you keep making, which is, well, nothing changes when you bring in 8 million people over 30 years.
Did I say that?
Can I finish, please?
Did I say that?
Can
Why do you
I
have to
finish?
invent
Can I finish,
points?
please?
You just can't address anything.
Can I finish, please? If I interrupted you, if I interrupted you every time you misrepresent my argument, you'd never talk at all.
Go for it. Okay.
So can I finish, please? You made the point that basically what I'm trying to say is, not trying to say, what I'm saying is when you bring in large numbers of people into a country from a different culture, that will necessarily change the culture. The other thing that I explained to you is there's been such a large wave of immigration into this country now that has fundamentally changed the sense of British people about the place in which they live. It is affecting the demographic dynamics of major cities in this country and the way people feel about that. But all of those things, the facts that I gave you about immigration, they are what they are. You can think that they're good, you can think that they're bad. That is a separate conversation. The facts are what they are, right? There's also a thing.
Okay. So then here's the argument that I'm going to make on Konstantin's behalf because I think he's too big of a pussy to do it, although he constantly alludes to it. So what he's saying is that I, Konstantin Kisin, am a good immigrant. I'm from Russia. My parents are either Jewish or Christian. We care about the United Kingdom. We care about, you know, our country that we immigrated to. We prioritize the nation state and country of the UK over that of Russia or Eastern Europe from where we emanate from. We're economically productive and we don't commit crimes. We are a higher class of immigrant, and those are the immigrants that should come into this country. And then what he's saying is that in the past 40 years, the United Kingdom has increased its population by 20%, and there are tons of Eastern Europeans who are moving in, and they're causing economic problems because they're working class. And so as a result, they're displacing the indigenous working class of the UK. And so there's economic resentment there. But then also what's happening is there's mass Muslim immigration from the Middle East and North Africa, partially economic migrants, but also refugees and asylees. But since they're from a different ethno-religious group that is not as compatible with the United Kingdom, and some of them are actually quite hostile to the United Kingdom, I don't like mass Muslim immigration to the Western world, and I think that it's going to corrupt and destroy our societies. That's it. That's the entirety of the argument. So if he just came out and said that, then you could be like, oh, well, you're an Islamophobe. Because if you look at the Pakistani grooming gangs and if you look at the nuances of jihadist terrorism, not only are these statistically infrequent, but they're also, typically law enforcement and counterterrorism operators and all that kind of stuff are able to handle these things. And so you're an Islamophobe. And most Muslims are economically productive, socially productive people. And therefore, go fuck yourself. And then he can say, well, let's look at the cousin marriage rates. Let's look at the welfare use. Let's look at, female genital mutilation. Let's take a look at jihadist terrorism. Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at that. And he'll bring up all of the various cultural, religious, and ethnic incompatibilities with the Western world.
About how British people feel about it. When I came to this country in 1996, 3% of the British public thought that immigration was a major concern. Today, about 65 to 70% of British people say that there are too many immigrants in this country and too many immigrants coming here. Now, I think British people probably have a better idea of how they feel about immigration than you, Stephen, and that is how they feel.
Why do you think over half the British population believes that the majority of the immigrants here today are here illegally, if they've got such a great handle on it or a great idea about what immigration is doing to the country?
Which, by the way, this is why I'm not a Democrat, because most people are stupid.
The reason that people overestimate immigration is people generally, when asked about things, overestimate pretty much everything or underestimate things terribly because people are not very good with numbers. But the other reason, of course, people aren't able to quote you the exact number of people who
I didn't ask for a quote of the exact number.
You said this earlier, and I'm addressing your broader point, which is why do people misunderstand the immigration statistics, is that people don't look at immigration as this is the number of people who came this year and this is the number of people who came last year. They look at the...
Sorry, Randy Chang says, is Muslim cousin marriage rate higher than Kentucky cousin marriage rate? Yeah. Like, shockingly so. We have a huge stereotype in Appalachia, and a huge stereotype in Kentucky and the rural South of cousin marriage, and Muslim cousin marriage rates blow that shit out of the fucking water. They just like annihilate it.
Reality of their lives, they look at the change they see around them, and what they're really concerned about is the cumulative impact of immigration over the period of their lifetime, which, as I explained to you, has been huge, unprecedented over the last 35 years, and will be even more unprecedented in terms of its cumulative impact over the next 35 years. Now, it's true that immigration has come down to 300 or something thousand in the last year. Doesn't mean it will stay that way, but also I never predicted it would get to 1 million. I think Matt did. But the point I would make is the transformation over a 30-year period is what people actually care about, and which is what they're right to care about. Now, as for the point about illegal immigration, yeah, it's true. Illegal immigration is a smaller percentage of the total immigration that we have than legal immigration, but it's still higher today than it was 35 years ago and 30 years.
Okay, somebody said bullshit, and so I'm going to pull this up by country. If you want to dig into it, dig into it. Excuse me. Cousin marriage rates in many Muslim-majority countries, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa and South Asia, are among the highest in the world, often ranging from 20% to over 60% of all marriages. Pakistani, Kuwaiti, Qatari, Sudanese, Afghan report the highest rates, with first cousin unions being the most common form. Pakistan, 60% of marriages are between cousins. Kuwait is 54%, Qatar is 54%, UAE 50%, Sudan 50, Afghan 49, Mauritania 47, Iraq 46, Yemen 44, Saudi Arabia 38, Jordan 28, Egypt 20.9, Algeria 22, Turkey 21. That's a lot of cousin fucking, bro. That's a lot of cousin fucking.
Years ago, which is way too high. Illegal immigration should be 0. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Do we have any final thoughts before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I mean, every crime should be 0, but there's always going to be some amount of crime or some amount of illegal immigrants. I guess the issue I have is that, you say, why do the British people not understand
Have we considered that some cousins are hot?
Numbers. It's like 10 or 11 million to 1 million. There are different estimates from 500,000 to 1.3 million or whatever illegals. That's a big ratio, 10 to 1 to be off by, to assume it's 50-50, that, or that there are more illegals than there are legal immigrants here. And I think the issue is people in your position, or people like Reform or Restore, depending on how far right you want to go, lie.
Hey, EBQM says, I mean, you need to compare with Western countries. No. Yeah, sure. Let's do that. I'll Google it momentarily. You could have Googled it, but don't worry, EPQM. I'll Google it for you.
Constantly about the immigrant population in the United Kingdom. And then as a result of selling those lies to the people, you get these ridiculous plans or attempts to fix it all in the United Kingdom. And because the problem was never as severe as it was stated in the first place, the problem ends up not being solved, and then you exacerbate other problems. So at the end of the Tory government, with this attempt with like the Rwanda plan, this idea that you're going to ship people to other, other countries to have them processed first, or with the idea that leaving Brexit would give the UK greater control over their illegal immigrant population. And the reality is it did just the opposite. You didn't have the right to access the same people that would try to claim asylum in the EU, and then if they were rejected once there, to send them back if they came to Britain next. You lost access to a lot of these things. And then the same people that were in charge of pushing those ideas.
Yeah, so a cursory Google search says that it's prohibited in 32 states and it's legal in 18. And in Western nations, on average, it's less than 5%. So yes, it's substantially lower.
Are now telling you and selling you on the idea that reform is going to come in and somehow fix the very same issues that they've been lying about and have failed to fix in the past. And you might hear this talking point, this cope that, well, reform is different. We're not going to be like, the old conservatives. But then you've got, all your politicians are going to be MP Tories that are defecting to join the new Reform Party. So I don't know where all this new blood is going to come from. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like a whole bunch of like, here's a fake problem. I'm going to put it in front of you. There is like a real problem here. Regardless of what you said earlier, I don't think rapes are good, mass rapes or normal rapes. I think there should be some probably cap on what type of immigrants and how many should come to the country. I just never really hear a discussion on any of that. I just hear 500,000 British girls have been gang raped by mass grooming gangs, and it wasn't like that when I came over in '96, despite the fact that those Rotherham grooming gang scandals started in the '80s. So I don't feel like I ever hear anything of substance being spoken about.
Well, it's a pity we didn't have someone from Reform on stage so you could rehash your Wikipedia talking points to them.
You're a Reform voter, though, right?
No, I've never voted. I've never voted for Reform.
Would you vote for Reform in the upcoming election?
Depends on who stands in my constituency. Last election, I voted for a Liberal Democrat.
I didn't ask about last election. In the upcoming election, will you vote for Reform?
I will probably vote for the same person who's a Liberal Democrat.
Okay, so you don't think you would support the Liberal Reform guy? I don't know, in your constituencies.
Reform. There's no party called Liberal
I'm sorry,
Reform.
you won't support the Reform candidate in whatever upcoming election. I don't know what constituency you live in.
I just told you that at the last election I voted for Liberal Democrat.
Yeah, I know, but the reason why you're saying that is because you won't answer for the next one.
Stop interrupting. Stop interrupting. Stop interrupting.
Yeah, go for it.
I just told you that at the last election I voted for a Liberal Democrat, and at the next election I intend to vote for him as well.
I'm just curious. You said in the past that you regret, or not that you regret, that you voted Remain for Brexit. Do you think that was a good vote? Do you think you should have remained, or do you think Brexit was a mistake?
I don't regret my vote for Remain, no.
Do you think Brexit was a mistake?
I think it had its negatives and positives, yeah.
Are you sure you're not running for a political party right now? Because that was the most politician answer I've ever heard in my life. Do you think that on net was Brexit a mistake?
Every decision has trade-offs that are positive and negative.
Remember what I said earlier about saying words that mean nothing? Obviously, this is true.
Konstantin Kissen thinks 500,000 crimes happen in basement trapping for years of native, pure Anglo-Saxon lasses en masse. Orders of magnitude is crazy. Michael Hatchtube with the 5. Listen, man, I appreciate the 5, but what pisses me off about this attitude is it sounds sweepy. It sounds very sweepy, and I'll tell you exactly why. So 500,000 crimes. Let's say it was 50,000. 50,000 is still a shitload, right? That's a shitload of people being pimped out. And then when you say native, pure Anglo-Saxon lasses, what I'm assuming you're implying is that the racial purity or the ethno-religious hatred that I'm assigning to it, that was assigned to it in articles, you don't think it's as crystal clear as that. That's the steelman of your perspective. But if I wanted to be a bad faith douchebag, then I would say that even in the very article that I linked in chat, when Harstar was asking for like articles about the grooming gangs or whatever, they were saying that these are girls who were in foster homes and abused houses, and they were voluntarily getting into posh cars of random Pakistani men. And so when the social workers and the law enforcement officers were called in order to report that these girls were getting pimped out, the social workers and the law enforcement officers dismissed it because they basically said they're young whores, right? They were like, oh, these are just a bunch of damaged sluts going around doing drugs and banging dudes for fun. This isn't a law enforcement issue. And so if I wanted to be like bad faith and kind of shitty to you, I could be like, oh, okay. So you're okay with 13 to 17-year-old girls getting pimped out as long as they say they volunteer for it and they're from broken homes.
But I'm asking, do you think that Brexit on net, was it a mistake?
I think a lot of people think that Brexit ruined the economy.
I'm not asking what a lot of people think. I'm asking you on net. Do you think that Brexit was a mistake?
I think it had some things that made things worse, and I think it had some that...
If you were God and you could choose whether or not the UK voted 51% Brexit or 49% Brexit, what would you push the button to have had them vote? 51% they would Brexit, or 49% and then they would remain in the European Union?
I honestly don't know.
Okay, but so the reason why I asked this question is to illustrate. I asked this question to illustrate how frustrating it is when people like you say things like, well, I voted liberal last election, or I voted Remain. Okay, you don't stand by that anymore, though. You constantly do this thing. No, you don't. You constantly do this thing where you come on stage, or you go on your show and you'll say things like, I used to be a liberal, but the liberals have changed so much, or I used to be a left-leaning person. And the left, I know you've tweeted the dumb picture. I know you've done it. They've changed so much, and now I have to identify with the center-right. I've heard you literally say things like Tommy Robinson makes statements to the left on immigration compared to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
He does.
Yeah, okay.
He does.
I've heard you say things like, right? But then when I ask, but then you guys say that everybody else has changed, and then I ask you about your past political votes, you won't defend them. So it seems like you're the one that's changed, which is fine, but you should just own that.
I voted Remain for reasons that were entirely different from the reason that most people voted Remain. The reason I voted Remain is I thought that it would weaken Europe's ability to stand up to Russia. I think I've been proven right on that. And I think the division within Europe has made Europe weaker in terms of its ability to stand up to Russia, and I think we've seen that. So in that respect, I think I was right to vote Remain. What I don't agree with is the narrative that a lot of people like to spin, that Brexit ruined the economy. I don't think that's true at all. If you look at the way other European economies are performing, they're performing even worse than the British economy. So my attempt to give you a nuanced answer is not my refusal to stand by my votes. It's an attempt to use my brain and give you a nuanced answer. Now, in terms of final, did you want to wrap up and move on?
Yeah, just final thoughts on this topic. That would be great, guys.
Yeah, so final thoughts on this topic. I would just recap and maybe add one other thing. We have had a level of mass immigration into Britain that has been extremely disruptive over a fairly short period of time, that has created an environment in which major cities in this country are effectively no longer the domain of the native population of this country, which is very disruptive to the people who've lived here. I'm not one of them. I myself am an immigrant, but I totally recognize that that's happened. I think culturally there have been some terrible things that have happened. I mean, the example of terrorism and grooming gangs is just one of them. But the failure of integration more broadly has been a big problem, to the point where you now saw in the by-election in Gorton Denton, the Green candidate campaigning in Urdu, in a foreign language, in a language not of our country, which I think is a signal of the terrible divisiveness that is we are likely to see in other communities or in other constituencies where some communities haven't integrated at all. And I think what that signals is a democracy works when people vote on the ideas that are being offered to them, not the ethnic and religious background of the candidate or the things that they will tell them. And I think you're increasingly seeing that. So all of these things are big worries to me. And of course, a lot of this would have been much easier to manage if we hadn't also at the same time had the doctrine of diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism, which have, instead of creating a monoculture into which people are encouraged to buy in and integrate, have instead created a society in which people are encouraged to see themselves as members of an individual community, which I think is essentially the end of.
I do want to, at the risk of being conciliatory with my own chat of liberals, it does look like the 500,000 to 1.5 million abused girls is an extrapolation based off of the Rotherham incident, in which 1,400 girls were sexually abused over like 2 or 3 decades. But then they just extrapolated that number out based off of demographic data that I'm not easily able to verify. And when I've tried to Google how many girls specifically have been abused by Asian grooming gangs, they have not differentiated those statistics. All they've done is they've said like 200,000 people get sexually abused per year that's reported in the United Kingdom. They haven't split out like the criminal organizational element of the grooming gangs. So it feels like a pretty weak stat.
A democratic process the way we've understood it to this point. So I think these are all terrible developments, and if this continues, it will only get worse.
Thank you.